This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Atom Audio, iZotope, Native Instruments, Empirical Labs, Sound Porter Mastering, and Trace Audio. You're hearing my voice right now through custom Trace Audio cables and the new Empirical Labs pump compressor mixed through iZotope RX, Ozone, Neutron, Nectar, and Plasma, all mixed on Atom Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes. It's a great way to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
There were a lot of other things that they instilled in me, like that holiness of making records, that gravity of making records. To me, it's like the most important thing. I grew up pretty spiritual, and I've since left some of that, but I do think like the thing that I hold very holy and is like that act of creating, you know, people creating things. And I think that's an important thing to respect.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Atom Audio proudly announces the D3V active desktop monitors and H200 dynamic closed-back studio headphones, designed in Berlin for pro-level monitoring in home studios. The D3V features 3.5-inch woofers with ribbon tweeters for studio-quality sound in a compact design ideal for songwriters and producers. The D3V includes USB-C and balanced analog inputs, a headphone output, and DSP room acoustics. The H200 closed-back headphones feature powerful 32-ohm drivers and comfortable ear pads in a durable metal construction, making them perfect for studio or portable use. The included plug-in enhances tonal control and stereo spatialization, so you never have to leave the sweet spot at atomaudio.com. At iZotope, saturation just got a whole lot smarter. Introducing the new iZotope Plasma plugin to supercharge your sound by giving your tracks exactly what they need, precisely when and where they need it. Unlike traditional saturators that apply a static effect, Plasma's groundbreaking flux saturation technology analyzes your sound and applies dynamic processing, adding targeted warmth, depth, and character to bring out the best in your mixes and masters. Use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off the new Plasma or any of the awesome plugins at iZotope.com. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today, whose name I forgot to ask the pronunciation of, is Brok Mende.
You nailed it.
Did
Absolutely
I really?
Nailed it. Yeah, you might be the first person in the world that's nailed it. I get Brok Mende a lot, so.
Brok Mende. Brok. Hey, I ain't broke, man. Who you calling broke? Broke. So Brok, owner of Friends Recording, a loft-style studio in Chicago, specializing in analog and digital, vintage and modern recording processes, also offering Dolby Atmos mixing and mastering. With over a decade of professional experience alongside some of the largest names in the music industry, over at Electrical Audio, Audiotree, etc., and within studios all over the U.S., Brok's work includes KAINA, Sen Morimoto, NNAMDÜ, I'm just going to go for that one, Serpentwithfeet, Madison McFerrin, that's a cool one in there, and we'll talk about that too, and Tasha, to name just a few, and in collaboration with designer, community builder, and partner, DeAnna Doersch. Doersch, close. Rockstars. I like to give you a truly live experience here. So forget edits. Edits are boring. Let's just do the real deal right here. Hanging out with Brok, who is not broke. In his own words, Brok is a listener by trade who likes to focus on creating something intentional and honest for the artist. He can take apart most anything involving capacitors and or transformers, and is usually able to put it back together correctly too. In the show notes, we have a playlist of Brok's stereo and Atmos mixes, so please check those out. They sound awesome. Thank you to Stephen Shirk over at Shirk Studio in Chicago also for introducing us. Please welcome Brok Mende to Recording Studio Rockstars. Brok, are you ready to rock?
I am ready to rock.
Dude, it's good to see you, man. It's nice to meet you. And it was fun to go listen to your music and sort of discover what you're all about. I don't know a ton about you, so I'm looking forward to learning more right now on the podcast. But I will say that listening to your mixes and the Atmos mixes as well just are really, really good sounding.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. I'm really grateful to be here. You have, all of the heroes on your podcast. So it's really an honor to be able to be talking to you.
Well, it's an honor for me to have you on the show. So thanks for joining us. Tell us a little bit more about yourself in your own words. I mean, I gave you a very brief intro. Kind of didn't say anything about who you are. So give us the short version of like, who is Brok?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, actually. I was in
home of Marilyn Manson.
Is that really true?
I think so.
Wow. I mean, I know we have a lot like Yellow Card. We got, what else do we got? Leonard Skinner, yada, yada, yada.
Oh, right. I didn't know Leonard Skinner was.
Yeah. But yeah, I grew up and played bands and stuff and kind of became the designated person who does the demos growing up. And then that started turning into a thing that I would do for other friends' bands. And then eventually I just realized I kind of like the production, recording, mixing side of the world a lot more than I do writing and playing the music in front of people. So, and I thought I was a little bit better at it than the other side. So, yeah, I started focusing a lot more on that. And after high school, looked around, realized there weren't a lot of people doing what I would like to be doing. And so I decided to move, looked at a bunch of different cities, all the usual, like normal, things, New York, LA, Nashville,
Come
Chicago.
on, throw Orlando in there. We know you took a drive to Orlando.
Well, I lived in Orlando for like a year and lived in Miami for a year as well. So,
oh, cool, man.
Yeah.
And what about, do you play instruments too? Did you start out like on a particular instrument?
I like to say, I can fiddle around on everything. I can do enough to be able to show somebody, like if I'm in a production session, hey, maybe we try something like this, and I'll like bang it out horribly and then give it to the person who is going to actually play it. You know what I mean?
Turns out they needed to make it simpler, a whole lot simpler anyway, right? Usually I think that's why we can pick up instruments in the studio. It's like they're doing whoever it is doing something that's way too complicated. And we're just like, how about this?
Yeah. So yeah, definitely big believer in just like making things simple, finding your constraints and using those as like guidelines and helping benefit the whole thing. I also, a lot of people say this, but one thing that really stuck out to me is like, if you can sing it, it's like good, So there's so many times where I'll be working with artists and I'll realize like, I'm not even really sure they quite understand or grasp what they're trying to do, and so we'll just sit there and like sing the guitar line or whatever, and then once they find it, it's like, oh, now I can play it easily and it feels normal and not like heady or crazy. So
if it feels Tom Petty, that's cool though.
Yeah, sure, of course.
No, I'm with you on that. Actually, I think the power of just singing a line or even turning it into a word so that you like understand what the phrasing is can be hugely helpful in the studio.
Definitely.
There's all the classic drum fills like bucket of beans, pat boom, Debbie boom,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, so I ended up falling in love with Chicago. I didn't really know anybody here, but I loved all the music coming out of the city and, growing up, everything I enjoyed, I was like, it's been through Chicago or came out of Chicago at some point in time.
Except for Sunshine.
Yeah. But I got a lot of that.
In the summer, it's great up there. It's really great.
Oh man, it's amazing. Yeah. But yeah, and long story short, I met Steve Albini, was able to start working there a little bit through a couple acquaintances, and super lucky for that. Became good friends.
Did you
with
spend
him
time
and Greg
working
Norman.
at Electrical?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Tell us about that too.
Oh my God. It was, well, it's funny because I also, I'm a lot better now that I've been in the industry working for, a while. But growing up as a kid, I was like super ignorant to like any names, I was like, oh, I like this thing. I like that thing. I don't really know anything about how it came to be or who was involved in it. So I get this gig at Electrical Audio, and I know Steve Albini is important because a lot of people around him are like, it's Steve Albini, he's important, and I'm like, oh yeah, cool. That's great. It sounds like a good opportunity. I'm excited to show up, worked hard, and, maybe like second weekend, I'm like going through the tape closet and I'm pulling off like Nirvana reels and like Shellac reels and like all these things. I'm like, wait, what the heck? These are like my favorite records in the world, where am I, which honestly, I think benefited me a great deal because I was definitely there to learn. And it just so happened I was learning from a master. So,
yeah.
Yeah,
that's cool. Yeah. I mean, Electrical is great. I spent time there too, and I got to know Steve a little bit. And for me, it was just really, really inspiring.
Definitely. I mean, he has that, like, he's a journalism major, right? So he's got that thing
and
about
his music, his recording is like a form of journalism.
100%. And I think now that I've grown a lot more and I've done a lot more records, I've like kind of started to develop my own ethos, but a lot of it pulls from that as well, like at least the fundamental part of that being that, I do offer a lot of input, especially when I'm being paid to as a producer, but or asked. And I do have a lot of people, I think, that come to me knowing that what point B is, but they don't necessarily know how to get to point B. So I find, that's how I like to produce people, helping them connect those dots. But at the foremost, like the most important part of what I'm doing when I'm starting to record somebody is I'm listening. I'm trying to understand what they're putting out. I'm trying to reflect that back to them so that we can make an honest like adjustment or assessment or figure out, what's happening and leave, the complicated, adulterated part of mixing and producing, outside as long as possible. So we can just get something that's honest and real and people understand what's happening, because it can be, there's so many confusing things in the studio, obviously.
Right. You're saying that if you can let the creative stuff just kind of flow on its own and stay in that zone, I wasn't meant to rhyme, but you can, you avoid the pitfalls of getting to engineering brain and like thinking about mixing and getting technical with all of it, which just sort of slows down and kills the creative process a bit.
100%. And being in an all analog studio at Electrical, like I didn't grow up learning the numbers, what's correct, what's not correct, -14 lufts, whatever the hell it is, I grew up really like listening and you're working on tons of different types of EQs and they all sound different and they all react different. You can boost 10K on this. You shouldn't boost 10K on that, et cetera.
It's funny that you say that because you're describing yourself growing up in a digital age, right? And plugins and things like that.
Totally.
And so my description of coming up in this would have been, I only had access to three EQs, for example, or something like that. There was the EQ in the Mac keyboard, and there happened to be a Neve EQ. Oh, that sounds a little different. And it's funny to just be reminded that when you grow up in the world of plugins, it's like your challenge is you have like hundreds of EQs to listen to. And like you said, they all sound slightly different. Where does that leave you,
Yeah, totally. And you've got a lot of resources as well that are helpful sometimes, but sometimes it's information overload,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I'm also kind of like I feel like I'm a little slow. You know, I find a couple things that I really like that I can't live without. I collect those things. I figure out how much I can do with that, and then I'll slowly add something else. Like I just got Pro Q3, the Fab Filter stuff.
Oh yeah.
Like 6 months ago, and I'm like,
Yeah,
whoa, where's this been all my life?
I'm still on number 2, but 3 has additional features I know, like dynamic EQ and stuff,
which
like
is a pretty great shortcut for me. But it's so funny because I was always like, I don't know, I have like the 7-band EQ, I have my CalRec console, it's just other things, whatever,
Yeah. So you have a CalRec console in your studio now?
I do, yeah. Well, it's a sidecar, so it's right over to my shoulder. But yeah, it's got the
Is it one
PQ3810.
that has an interesting history itself?
The history for me is that I got the parts from somebody in Nashville who didn't really know what they had. And then I put it back together and reassembled it. And now I've got 10 channels of like inline EQ, full of Lundell transformers and all that stuff. So
that's cool, man. So like, even though your intro says you like to take things apart and then put it back together, in this case, you didn't even have to take it apart. You just got to put it back together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, which honestly, this unit was a little difficult. A lot of searching for things on forums and stuff. But
okay, cool. We might dive a little. Well, let's keep talking about that combined with electrical, because I'd love to hear a few takeaways from you about your experience over there. Not just because it's Steve or because, like let's use a big name on the interview, but because electrical is really a remarkable place. And when I was there, one of the things that really hit me about it is, in a time where big style studios were disappearing. So in the late 90s, bigger studios were starting to fade out, and the home studio era was beginning to appear. Here was a place where Steve was like, we're going to have 8 people on full-time staff,
Yeah, totally.
Or maybe, I don't know if it was all 8 were on full-time, but there was like a staff of people working there. And I was like, this is really cool,
And there still is.
Yeah. And there was this great attitude about like, it's a service industry. We're going to be very professional about this. There was a repair shop. There was always stuff that was in the works. If something wasn't working, it was on its way. It seemed to be on its way to the shop, and it was going to be fixed, and it would be working later,
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about your experiences there, and maybe any of the things you learned about being so fearless as to rebuild a CalRec console.
Well, I'd seen it done, specifically that side of things. I'd seen it done constantly by like Greg Norman, for instance, a genius over there. I loved hanging out with him. When I was there, he was at least the guy that pretty much was fixing everything always. And you're right. Like, he just posted something on Instagram the other day, where it was him like late at night fixing one of their tape machines. And I'm sure it was because it went down during that day and they had to have it working the next morning,
Wow.
So, he's there 3 a.m. making sure it's working. So, super respect that man. And, grateful that I just got to see somebody who was taking things apart and putting them back together and realizing like, as much as the process can be magic, the tools that we're using are not magic. It's like metal touching metal. It's these things happening in a series. And that makes this thing happen. And I feel like for me, at least, having a micro understanding of that not only makes me less afraid to use it, but also opens up so many different things where like when I was at Audiotree, I had recapped our SSL 4K. It was an E 4K with a G computer. And we recapped the entire thing. And that process, like, I'm like, oh, I know when I push this button, this is what's happening. This relay is doing this thing and touching this other thing.
Right, because you were seeing the inside of the circuit
100%.
board.
Yeah. And then that also adds to the creativity because you're working with somebody and they're like, oh man, I wish, this would sound this way. And you're like, oh, you know what? I actually know exactly how those things touch. And if I change that or adjust this other thing, that's something that's not in the manual, but I know that I can do it because I know what it looks like. You know what I mean? So
yeah. Now, have you? What's curious to me about that too is, and I kind of joke about this recently, that sometimes I feel like I'm doing more maintenance on my digital studio than I ever had to do on my analog studio, and that's probably not entirely true or fair, but it kind of is. And you strike me as somebody who's diving into the physical side of tech work in the studio, but also fearless about the digital side, I think, based on assuming that I'm hearing that through your Atmos mixing and stuff like that. And so do you have anything to say about what it's like to troubleshoot, actual analog gear versus software?
Ooh, yeah, that's a very good question. Well, I mean, okay, so now being a studio owner, I joke with people all the time. I joke with Steven all the time, and Steven's like, yeah, I know, it's crazy, right? You signed up to make records and now you know way too much about like HVAC units and hard drives. And I'm like, yeah, I didn't really sign up for that, but I know that I need to understand that so that I can, do the job. So some of that has been interesting. I do think, the digital stuff just moves so fast. Every update, something changes. We just updated Pro Tools at the studio, and now the renderer for Atmos is like embedded in it if you want it to be. And that was like a massive shift, and all these things that I'm having to like learn and keep up with. Like with the analog, it's kind of nice because I feel like I understand all of the pieces that have to happen in an analog system. With the digital, it's infinite.
Do you ever feel like, I mean, one of the things that occurs to me sometimes is when you're dealing with, well, we're saying analog and digital,
sure,
but it's not really an analog versus digital thing 100%. No. It's kind of like analog equals the physical world and digital equals the software programmed world of code. And sometimes I feel like the analog physical world of figuring things out, kind of like figuring out how to fix a dryer or something like that, or figure out how to get your car running again.
Yep.
Involves the laws of physics that can't be broken. And so therefore you have this fundamental thing. And in the software world, it's like there's kind of some laws and some rules, but they might just change them all between last time you did it and the next time you do it. And they're buggy and they don't even work. And sometimes they break their own laws of physics internally. And it's like you'll do something and you're using software, Pro Tools, for example. We'll pick on Pro Tools or something. And you're in record and you're like, I've done, and like everything's right. It's just not, there's no signal, it says there's signal, but there isn't. And it's just because internally it's breaking its own laws of physics.
100%. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what I mean by like, you can understand the pieces, the rules, the laws of physics. And it's like, okay, I get that. I know what a capacitor does. I know what this, whatever. And yeah, with the digital stuff, I update and I'm like, I have no idea what just happened. But now all of a sudden this feature that I've been told is impossible is like readily available.
Right. And they're both kind of valid because they both work. I mean, digital works when it works. And sometimes it's almost like I have to have a slightly different attitude and brain towards it. It's like, just keep updating, just keep trying.
100%. And I'm not a programmer, but I do know a lot more about a computer than I think the average person does. I know, which is again, not really what I, wanted to know, but it is helpful and does make it easier. Like if I didn't know how Pro Tools is structured behind the scenes, like I just, there's so many sessions I would not have been able to complete. I'll show up to studios that I don't work in typically, and they'll be like, oh yeah, no, sorry, that doesn't work. And I'm like, what do you mean I can't have, separate cue mixes for all of my musicians? Let me show you how this works, and have to go in.
Are you doing separate cue musicians separate cue mixes for musicians out of Pro Tools often? Is that how you're doing your sessions?
So we use the digital side. We're heavily involved in the UAD stuff. So I have our system set up a little strange, but basically the console software for UAD, how you control your interfaces, whatever. There's 4 cues that are built into it. I have those feeding 4 inputs on our Furman, the HD6 whatever boxes, which makes it pretty easy. So those can feed off before they hit Pro Tools. So I'm not even thinking about latency or.
What do you do about your talkback mic and communication when you do that?
So I have an Apollo Twin that really only serves as like volume for my speakers, my stereo setup, and a talkback. It has a talkback built into it, and it'll feed
because
all
it
the
uses
cues.
its own console. That it'll have the talkback mic hit all the headphone sends.
100%, yeah, and it's 1-to-1 for the most part. So it's like Q1 goes to the first thing. I have a patch bay where I can route things as complicated as I want, but I do that, and then I have for like quick sessions, whatever, I just have a mults of my whatever comes out of the speakers go into the stereo knob on the Furman box too. So there are times where I'll have a singer come in and I'll be like, okay, you don't need to think about anything. Here's a vocal if you want more vocal. And that's it, and then it's easy. We get off to the races, and nobody wants to come in and get a lesson on, like, I don't know, engineering while they're trying to record a drum part or whatever.
Yeah, totally. Native Instruments introduces the new Complete 15 bundle, featuring Contact 8, offering versatile synths, sampled instruments, and innovative effects. Perfect for creating everything from emotional scores to dance floor grooves. Contact 8 includes exciting new creative tools like chords and phrases for inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a hybrid instrument blending organic and synth sounds. The Complete 15 bundle also includes updated Massive X, Guitar Rig 7 Pro, and AI-enhanced Isotope Ozone 11. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. Empirical Labs, creators of the famous Distressor, offer high-performance gear for audio pros. The Fatso adds warmth to digital recordings with harmonic generation, tape emulation, and compression. The Pump, a 500 series compressor, features 8 selectable ratios, precise attack and release controls, saturation, and an attack mod for incredible transient control. The Arouser and Big Freak plugins are also available at empiricallabs.com, where you can use the coupon code RSR10 for 10% off. Follow at Empirical Labs on Instagram, making studio gear that works a little easier, a little better, and a lot longer. And then does UAD... They don't have an accompanying app where a singer could pull up the iPhone app and adjust their own More Me? Because I know PreSonus would do things like that, and I don't think that's doable in Pro Tools yet. Although there is a remote, like Avid Control and stuff.
Yeah,
and I think Logic will do something like that.
Yeah. Well, in Pro Tools, I use SoundFlow a little bit. We can talk about that a little later, but
sure.
Which has some of that application stuff. But in our setup, the artist doesn't really need that. I don't know about anything in the UAD world where it does that. Yeah. I don't think that's true.
That's fine. I mean, we don't have to look for the answer. I was just curious if that was.
But they wouldn't need it because
all the
they have
questions
it.
that just pop into my head when they pop into my head.
Yeah. Yeah, but they'll have the knob right under them. So if they need more of them, they turn up the knob.
Okay, cool. Well, that was a great little takeaway for that, because I do think separate cue mixes in a studio session with bands, and you're recording a lot of bands. I mean, after all, you are in Chicago. Chicago is known for live musicians playing together and doing the rock and roll thing, which is cool. And having separate headphone sends, but then having a lot of times headphone sends seem to be useful if everybody's mostly hearing the same thing that you're hearing, but then just have that ability to further adjust it, right?
Yeah, which is exactly how I pretty much build the whole thing, which has made a lot of sense for me. Sometimes it's a little bit of a when other engineers come in and use the space, I'm, coaching a little bit.
They have to wrap their brain around it. Yeah. Do you basically find that all the headphone sends going out to the musicians are post fader sends so that when you change your mix, it changes it for them, but then you're just giving them more boost or less, lowering or raising volumes of each of those instruments in their headphones? Or do you give them pre-fader sends where once they have a mix, it doesn't change no matter what you do?
Yeah, so on the Furman HDS6 system, it's 4 mono sends, right? And then 1 stereo send. The stereo send is post what comes out of the speakers, So anything I'm listening to, they're going to hear on the far right knob. I tell people,
Right.
If you're confused, just turn that up or down.
Right. So if you change sessions and pull up yesterday's song, it immediately shows up on that stereo.
100%. Yeah. And then in our normal tracking mode or whatever. And then the 4 sends so if I have a drummer, a bass player, a guitar player, and a singer, I'll split them onto those 4 knobs as well. So they'll still be coming off of the far right knob, but if they want more of themselves, they can just boost that, and that's how they can adjust their mix.
And we all know what the drummer gets in that mix. It's called click.
Yeah, 100%.
Begins with a C and ends with a K.
Yep.
And lots of it. Okay, cool. So let's see. Were there, we can move away from electrical, but before we do, were there any sort of professional takeaways that you had from your time there? For example, you could have started there and then gone off and done music for a hobby, but you decided to do it for a living. So was there anything you felt you learned from that atmosphere that helped you enter the world professionally?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it was an interesting, it was just, well, one, it was an inspiring place, and it was interesting how Steve and Greg and JSP and all the other people that were there while I was there, they threaded this beautiful needle of there's a gravity to making records, it's this holy act, but it's still they're people and it's very normal and it's a job. And it was really interesting seeing that because I'm in this world-class studio, but it still feels in some ways somebody's home studio, and not in the gear obviously and in the quality, but in the way that they approached things and welcomed people into things. And I thought seeing a human being making records in that way was amazing. I mean, yeah. And it was just, that was super inspiring. There were a lot of other things that they, instilled in me, that holiness of making records, that gravity of making records. It's fun in games, but it's also to me, it's the most important thing. I grew up pretty spiritual and I've since left some of that, but I do think the thing that I hold very holy and is that act of creating, people creating things. And I think that's an important thing.
I agree. I like having a seriousness about a session that is a combination of, we should all be having fun and it should be playful, but our intention is totally serious. So everything we're doing, we take seriously, or we treat it with serious care, even if we're just goofing around,
100%. Yeah. And it's funny. I'll have sessions with certain people. I'm producing a record for this band, White Lucy, and they've become best friends of mine. And we brought in a drummer for this record that he's the sweetest guy in the world. And, sometimes during the takes, we're jumping around and I'm very animated. I'm trying to express, what I want out of it, but it's so serious as well. It's I don't know. I don't know how to really describe it except for, you understand, but, and maybe a lot of listeners understand that too, but there's this, I don't know. I don't know where that's going, but.
Well, I think I think it's important because it's a concept when you're in the studio of one way I like to think about it is just great care in the craftsmanship if you can. So you're listening very carefully to things. You're inspecting things that need inspection, and you're being as transparent as you can in some situations so that like the music or whatever needs to happen in that moment can like transparently and effortlessly come through and be captured. That's kind of like the seriousness of it. And it's like, or like having an incredible respect for a first take when it's time to have incredible respect for that take, And
100%.
then other times not caring at all because it doesn't matter,
Yeah. Yeah. Just throw the spaghetti at the wall or whatever,
Yeah.
So.
Okay, cool. So tell us more about Friends of Friends Studio and where you're at now. And are you sitting, tell us, like, describe where you are right now. Are you surrounded by the tools that you work with every day?
I am. Yeah. I'm right at my studio desk in the middle of Friends of Friends recording, our like control room.
With a white couch in the background, Rox.
Yeah, it's a nice couch, right? But yeah, we're in Humboldt Park, Chicago. We call it a loft-style recording studio. We have like 2 ISO booths and then a very large control room when I'll just track drums right in the room with me, which is
that kind of qualifies it as the quote loft style.
The loft, all
like one
Wilco
space.
or something. Yeah.
Like
Exactly.
an artist loft.
Exactly. Yeah. But it was started by me and my partner in business and life, DeAnna. Yeah, honestly, like it kind of started over the pandemic. I was freelancing out of a bunch of different studios full time for a couple of years after I had left Audiotree, and the pandemic started. I wasn't traveling, obviously, and needed a safe place to keep making records. So, DeAnna was like, "Hey, we should start a studio." I'm like, "Hey, that's crazy. That's an insane thing to say." But we talked about it some more, and she's, fundamental to why this place exists and feels good. And so through her encouragement and everything, we started making things happen and building more and more. So
you're like, I got an idea. I'll build a console. Rebuild an old cow wreck. How's that for a start?
Also, pandemic, it's like it was helpful for my brain to have something to not ruminate on.
Yeah. And then what about Atmos? Did you set up, like, describe what what does that mean? What is it to set up an Atmos mixing studio?
So a few people do it a few different ways. For us, we have our stereo setup, which is Adam's A8Xs with a T10 sub, Adam sub. I really like the Adam stuff. When I was over at Audiotree, we had the same pair of Adams, and then we had these massive Genelecs. And I just, I was lucky enough to be able to hear and mix and work on like speakers from tons of different price points. And I just felt like unless I was going to spend, $10,000, there wasn't much to spend money on besides those Adams. So
it's the A8H. That's a lot of A vowels.
I know. A8X. It's the older version. Yeah, I think the H's are the newer line. Yeah. So, but yeah, they're awesome. I really understand them and feel comfortable working on them.
Yeah, I like their speakers a lot.
Yeah.
I'll be mixing your podcast on some Adam speakers.
Beautiful. There you go. Yeah. And then we have a Kali Audio 714 system. So that means 7 surround speakers, left, right, center, far left, far right, back left, back right. 1 subwoofer, which actually I use the Adams T10 for that sub. And then 4 Kali Audio overhead speakers, front, left, front, whatever.
So the T10 is the sub, and that gets shared between the Atmos and the stereo setup.
Yep. I have,
and then
flip a switch on the patch
714. Do the stereo speakers also become the left, right, and the Atmos, or do you basically have 2 systems?
Yeah, I basically have 2 systems. Yeah, I think eventually, I might upgrade our system to be just an Atmos 714 system one day. But yeah, when we bought into it. That's what we could afford. And honestly, the Kali Audios are great. I feel really great about.
But I mean, is there
mixes.
a reason why somebody would think about the stereo left-right as a separate system from the left-right that are part of an Atmos system? I guess that's just, I'm asking like basic questions.
No, that's a good question. Yeah, it's a little easier on the routing side for me because I have a controller for my 714 system, and then I have a controller for my stereo system. So in terms of like just like overall volume management, things like that, I can just like flip a switch and be in one system and not the other, you know.
And I wonder if it would make sense for somebody to feel like their stereo left-right speakers are somehow like heavy lifters compared to the other Atmos speakers, whereas maybe an Atmos system, it's best to think of all the speakers as equal as you can.
Yeah,
like
that's exactly how I think of it. Yeah, I'm, you know, and in a lot of the way you're meant to set it up, Dolby specs and stuff. It's you're trying to create this
a match set,
exactly, where everything is speaking to the center.
Yeah. So
evenly.
To preface all that, or just put it in context, rock stars, Brok's Atmos mixes fucking rock. So as we talk about this stuff, do go listen to those. And actually, I'll put it back to you, Brok. How should they listen? How can they go experience your Atmos mixes? We have the playlist in the show notes, but what do they need to do to actually hear it?
Yeah, great question. So I'll backtrack just a step and then go forward. But the cool thing about Atmos, in case folks don't quite understand, and the somewhat confusing thing about Atmos is when you're mixing with Atmos, you're not mixing to a designated playback system. Because if you were mixing just to a 714 system, you'd be mixing surround sound 714. With Atmos, you're mixing, you use a 714 system, but when it plays back, it renders the most immersive version of itself to whatever you're listening on. So we have two ears, right? Left, right, but we can hear sounds above us, behind us, in front of us. And that's because those sounds sound different to us in our brain. And the Atmos, the Dolby engineers have figured out how to basically put those front, back, left, right, up, down signatures in sound, put those in those mixes. So when they get recreated on, say, headphones, it still sounds like those sounds are coming from behind you or above you when it's rendered to a headphone mix. So if you wanted to listen to Madison McFerrin's record in Atmos, you could go onto Apple Music or you could go onto Tidal. I believe Amazon also has an Atmos renderer as well.
And we do have an Apple playlist of your work in the show notes.
Awesome.
Too, so
yeah. So I use Apple. I think Tidal just announced that they have a more affordable tier for Atmos listening as well, maybe today even.
Someone asked me a while back, do you fear AI will one day replace you as a mastering engineer? Well, it hasn't yet. That's because algorithms don't listen to music or to clients. Hi, I'm Brian Murphy of Sound Porter Mastering. When I master, I experience the music as your fans will, with the honesty of fresh ears. And unlike AI, I master with your intentions in mind, not merely to process the mix and boost the levels. If you want an experienced live engineer to master your music as only a human can, find me at soundporter.com.
Sick of searching for the right cable or wondering how to hook up your studio? Trace Audio has you covered. Based in Nashville but serving studios everywhere, Trace Audio specializes in custom cables, patch bay labels, and wiring solutions for home and pro studios. Try out the free online custom patch bay label designer at traceaudio.com to easily color code, label, and organize your XLR or quarter-inch bays, which are popular with home studios. It's sleek, professional, and simple to use. Then use the code RSR15 for 15% off printing and shipping your custom patch bay labels to take your studio to the next level. Now, let's talk about headphones. I know it's a little tricky. Again, we're in that software world, so everything changes from moment to moment.
100%.
But for example, I was able to pull up the Apple Music player on the studio computer. Mm-hmm. And I just go into the settings and enable oh gosh, what do they call it? Where it's the volume matching between sound check. That's what they call it. So I enabled sound check, meaning it'll match the stereo and the Atmos relative levels. And then I just put it on Atmos always on so that I know it's on for sure when I'm listening. And then the little Atmos logo comes up in the top.
I was going to say, yeah, they're great about the visuals. So usually if there's an Atmos mix available, because it's a separate mix, it'll show you, the Dolby Atmos logo, and then next to it, it'll probably say like lossless audio or ADM or whatever, and that'll be the stereo version.
But it's not a separate mix for the listener. It's a separate mix for you, the creator, and for Apple to send it to us. But as a listener, we're just hearing a mix. It just sort of seamlessly flips from stereo to Atmos in the background and gives us the little visual indicator so that we know which of those mixes we're listening to. I mean, the reason I'm saying that is Rockstars, you're not going to have to go like choose one of the mixes or something.
No, good point. Yeah. So yeah, and it'll flip between the Dolby Atmos mix and the stereo mix. But when I did it, I did two unique mixes, one in the Atmos platform and one in the stereo platform, because you have completely different parameters when you're working in Atmos.
Yeah. Okay. So then, to carry it a little bit further, if I was to listen to the Atmos mix in the studio and I had my speakers going, I would probably just hear something that kind of a little bit weird. It would be like a binaural recording coming out of my speakers.
It's literally exactly what it would be. Yeah. So usually it sounds a little phasey, or, like, why does the vocal like seem hollow or something?
Yeah. But if I put headphones on, then I was able to hear the binaural recording or the binaural rendering of that Atmos mix in my headphones, and it sounds great. And then what's kind of a fun thing that I've been doing to educate my ears on the difference, and I would encourage you to do this too, Rockstars, is go into the Apple Music Player settings. And I can't speak for all the other platforms because I haven't been also trying that there. But in the Apple Music settings, then you can you can flip from Atmos always on to Atmos always off, and then you hear it flip over to the stereo mix, and then you go Atmos always on and it flips over. It's not exactly an instant A/B, which would be a nice feature just to hear, but it's close enough, it's quick enough that we can kind of tell the difference, and it's very educational. It really, at least in headphones, it really gives me a feeling for what's the difference in those two mixes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to do it.
And then beyond that, I guess if you have like a sound bar, or if you have an Atmos or a surround speaker setup, it would sort of
so the render
down to those, right?
100%. Yeah. So the renderer will know, what's attached to it. So if you have an Atmos enabled sound bar, maybe your sound bar has little speakers that fire at the ceiling to make sounds come down, sound like they're coming behind you or above you or whatever. There's a lot of those these days. It will know what format it's supposed to play back, and it'll play that immersive format back. So theoretically, if it's done well, then it will, give you a more immersive mix.
Now, if you have a setup and it's just going to a surround playback system, I guess it would have to be Atmos compatible though, right? Otherwise it won't know that it's an Atmos thing. Maybe that's too nerdy a question to try.
No, so I have a good friend who has a 714 system in his basement, lucky him. But his like Onkyo receiver receives Atmos. It renders Atmos. And so when he's listening to Apple Music, it will play back a 714 version just like it does in our studio.
Oh, cool. All right. Yeah. So yeah. And then my Tesla Model 3 has some sort of immersive thing in there, but honestly, it's just a big fat head scratcher. And I have no clue whether it's actually rendering anything at all other than just some kind of weird phasey stereo thing that Elon thought was cool sounding.
Yeah. I mean, I tell people all the time, like even artists, it's a tool, right? And it's also, there's a lot of things involved with Dolby Atmos that are like so new. And with that newness, There's a lot of left turns that can be made that, are maybe good for music, maybe not. I don't know, but people are exploring and trying and figuring things out. And I think that, eventually the dust will settle and we'll have something a little more standardized. But, and honestly, I listen to Atmos mixes these days compared to, a year or two ago, and everything's becoming massively different and very cool, I think. So
yeah, no, I agree. I'm hearing cooler and cooler mixes, including yours.
No, thank you.
So, and then I would further say that Mercedes-Benz is making cars. If that's your budget for your car, they are making cars that do play back Atmos pretty amazingly. And also, hopefully for a car like mine, it has multiple speakers in it. So hopefully it'll just be a software upgrade down the road where they're just like, cool, we're now sending all these different sounds out to the different speakers.
Yeah, 100%.
Unless they didn't wire it up that way internally, I guess. Back to the analog part, right? If all the sound just goes out to an amplifier and then splits out to the speakers, we're screwed. But if it goes through individual amplifiers, then we might have hope. There could be hope.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
What's one of your favorite things about mixing in Atmos? And is defining it as mixing in Atmos even the complete way to think about it? Or are you creating an Atmos too?
Ooh, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a really good distinction. I feel like I haven't heard a lot of people talk about it in that way. I mean, it's let me think about that answer. I mean, the emotional thing that you can get from mixing is like it's a shortcut. It can be super cinematic, it can be super emotional, it can be super dramatic, and I think a lot of people will come to me looking for something that has a lot of like emotional intelligence, and so with Atmos it's very easy to introduce that drama so fast. Yeah. I think there's like a lot of different ways I'm thinking about it when I'm working in Atmos, because there's also the school of thought where it's like, oh, you just want to close your eyes and like feel the drummer, slightly to your left and the bassist slightly to your, and the guitar is, and I think that's a really cool way to approach it as well. I think
more like, in other words, some people are thinking about it just like a wider sound stage, and some people you might sometimes be thinking about it like a whole new creative form of expression.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, somewhere in the middle is probably what's going to be the thing that lasts. Because, the violins whooshing past your head, every chorus is like maybe a little tiresome at times, but I don't know. If you close your eyes and it feels more truthful and more honest to whatever the message of the music is, then I think that's what's going to be cool. Sometimes that's violins whooshing past your head. Sometimes it's, feeling like you're right behind the drum kit or whatever. So.
Okay. So let's stay on this for just a moment. So when you're working, you've got 714. So you got 12 speakers all around you. Well, I guess if you count the sub, otherwise 11, right?
Yeah.
And you may be, we might all be familiar with mixing in stereo and arriving at things like comfortable mix level, all that kind of stuff. How is that similar or different in your experience to mixing in Atmos? Do you still just sort of find that you have a process at a comfortable mix level, and a lot of it is routing and just doing stuff that needs to be done? When you do swirling violins, when in your mix process does that happen? Early on in the mix or near the very tail end?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, okay, so if I'm doing the stereo and the Atmos, I'm focused on the stereo, that's still like the master thing, making sure that's sounding amazing. We finish the mix, it's finalized. I'm going to bounce out stems where I'm printing a lot of what I've done in combining as much as I feel appropriate. Usually it's a little more multi-tracked, broken out than I would if I was sending off mixed stems to like, the label or whatever. We're finished. Here's your drums, bass, guitar, and vocal. So it might be more like kick, snare, other drum, several different basses, whatever. I'll pull that into an Atmos mix. And then, yeah, I mean, when you're thinking about things like overall level, what feels right, what feels appropriate, like that's just been making a lot of records and developing that, I think. Just like it was when I started mixing in stereo and realizing like
you might
this
do the
is
cool
loud,
panning
this is not
thing.
loud.
Like you're saying you might do the cool panning thing at any point in the process that it just felt like the right move to do. It doesn't necessarily have to be early or late in a process.
Totally. And I mean, thinking about it like philosophically, with Atmos, you're constantly trying to figure out, I mean, in mixing too, in stereo, but I think it's so much more important in Atmos to really understand like what the focal part of the mix at any moment in time is. Because it can become so quick and easy to make everything spread and then nothing spread. It's just like noise all of a sudden,
Right.
So,
in the same way that if everything's in stereo, then then nothing's interesting. If everything's
100%.
in Atmos, then where does that leave you? With great responsibility. No, sorry. With great power comes great responsibility.
100%. Yeah. And like I was saying, it's a tool. It's a hammer. You can build a house with a hammer. You can hurt yourself with a hammer. So
what are some fun things that you've done? Like if you just think about something cool you tried recently, what comes to mind?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I think I've been experimenting a lot more with like multi-band splitter stuff with some of the Atmos stuff.
Cool. What does that mean?
Yeah, sorry. That was a lot of stuff. But like, you have a bass guitar and maybe there's a ton of information in this bass guitar, a lot of subs, a lot of mid-range, splitting it and centering the sub, making it dead center, and then pulling the mid-range apart and pulling it to the sides of you. So it really feels like, oh, wow, I'm like getting punched, but I'm also being hugged by this bass, something physical like that. I mean, I think very physically. Left turn really quick, but do you know Evelyn Glennie? Do you know of Evelyn Glennie?
No, not yet.
She is a marimbist, like a world-class marimbist, Scottish marimbist, and percussionist, but she's nearly deaf. And I remember being maybe like 18 years old, listening to, I think like a TED Talk or something along those lines. And she was talking about how like so much of learning how to listen is like physical. It's like how it resonates in your body, how it makes you feel, how you're reacting physically. And I feel like once I understood, once I heard somebody put it in that way, I like realized like, oh, that's like everything to me. Right. So with Atmos, it's actually pretty exciting for me because I'm like, wow, I'm like able to like, it's very clear to me if it's right or wrong because I'm literally moving sound around different pieces of my body.
Rockstars, this is why headphone mixes suck. This is why the headphone mix sucks. This is it. It's the core. It's because it's so much more than just what comes out of two little speakers into your ears.
100%. Yeah.
Now, I don't know if this is her I'm thinking of, but I do remember hearing a story about a woman who was deaf or nearly deaf, who was a great percussionist. And she talked about leaning in and putting her face close to the timpani drums and humming into them. And she would feel the resonance against her, like bouncing back in her face. And that's how she could tune them.
Yes, I think that's exactly. Yeah. And she's known to show up to like very high art concert things barefoot, because she's feeling the
great. That's
stage.
how I like to roll.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, I'm from Jacksonville, Florida. I didn't even know if shoes existed for the first 18 years of my life.
Now, man.
There you go.
Okay, very cool. So the band splitting, so that's a cool thing. So this idea of, I mean, sometimes we have like the Mono Maker plugin, and like if I was using my BrainWorks digital the EQ, that one, for example, you can, do the Mono Maker and you just pan or rotate the knob up and it's a cutoff frequency so that everything below that frequency goes mono and the other stuff is stereo. And that can be fun to explore in stereo mixes. I don't always find a great need for that, but sometimes I do. But in the Atmos, I could see how like you might want to really send things around to other speakers. And if you send the low end around, you run into potentially a lot of phase conflicts, right?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Getting a nice punchy, getting the front of your sound stage like punchy and like forward, for lack of better words, is like complicated in Atmos. It can be like really easy to lose
Mush
focus. Yeah, exactly. And so things like that, I've found like a great deal of success in that. You know,
what about so if you start out with a stereo mix, you might learn initially to just like, hey, don't do anything, just pull up faders and strike a balance. In Atmos, do you find that still applies? You can still do it like that and just put things in different speakers? Or because of this low end challenge, do you find that you absolutely have to start addressing some of that front focus before you can even balance the faders?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little, Atmos sometimes also reveals issues that were hidden in the stereo, you know, or that you had addressed in stereo that now doesn't work when it's, oh, I can hear the guitar. It's to my like back left directly. It's the only thing coming from my back left and it's clear as day. And now it sounds like it's a tin can, you know, but in the stereo mix,
because you filtered it so much,
100%, it was cutting and punchy and great, you know? So there are aspects of that where you're realizing like, oh, okay, I might have to do some additive things or go back to my stems and bypass a couple things that I don't need anymore because it's completely different. But yeah, I mean, I honestly think like, I mean, obviously balance is everything. I do think 9 times out of 10, just letting something sound the way it is and finding a balance is the right solution. I think sometimes issues, become more clear in Atmos where you're like, oh, wait, that doesn't sound great because now I don't have the bass fighting it or whatever, covering up this issue in the mid-range that I didn't realize was an issue, you know?
Awesome.
So
iZotope is truly amazing for mixing and mastering your music, like the new iZotope Plasma plugin featuring flux saturation, which helps you sculpt the harmonics in your sound, enhancing the excitement and clarity of your tracks or mixes. And Ozone, with its built-in mastering assistant, helps you analyze your mix, suggesting all the settings you need for a professionally mastered result based on your chosen style of music and EQ curve, referencing a specific song if you want. Ozone features sophisticated yet simple modules like clarity, impact, low-end focus, stabilizer, imager, exciter, and spectral shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting, allowing you to adjust the settings to your taste so it sounds incredible. And with the magic of master rebalance, you can even manipulate the vocal, bass, and drums separately at the mastering stage. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off Plasma Ozone RX or any of the fantastic plugins at iZotope.com. Adam Audio is proud to announce the new D3V active desktop monitor system and H200 dynamic closeback studio headphones designed in Berlin and perfect for pro-level monitoring in a home studio setting. The D3V is a fully active desktop monitoring system featuring 3.5-inch woofers and hand-folded ribbon tweeters for studio-quality sound in a compact form in elegant white or black finish. It's perfect for songwriters, producers, podcasters, and mixers with digital input over USB-C or balanced analog inputs and includes a headphone output and DSP room acoustic switches. The H200 is Adam Audio's new closed-back studio headphone featuring 40mm peak drivers and memory foam ear pads in a durable metal construction with a detachable main cable for dual-sided connectivity, making the H200s reliable for demanding studio use. With an impedance of just 32 ohms, they will sound great with your studio or laptop and include a plug-in for enhanced tonal control and stereo spatialization, so you never have to leave the sweet spot. To see the new D3V monitors and H200 headphones, go to atomaudio.com. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show. My guest today is Brok Mende, joining us from Friends of Friends Studio in Chicago, talking about Atmos and other fun things. Brok, you ready to jam, dude?
I am ready to jam.
So when you talk about moving things to different speakers in the mix and it reveals something that worked in stereo but doesn't work, for some reason, the image of like extracting the ingredients back out of a recipe. And,
I think
having them, it's like now it's just salt or whatever, and you're like, okay, that's a little too much salt right there.
I think that's a perfect way to describe it, honestly. Yeah, that's exactly how it feels to me.
So that would imply that when you're doing the stereo mix and the Atmos mix, the stereo, an Atmos mix should fold down to a stereo mix, but a stereo mix does not fold into an Atmos mix.
No. And I think there are, especially earlier on, there were a few people who were experimenting with that,
A one size fits all.
Yeah. And I just, every time I'd listen to it, I'd be like, oh man, why don't you just do only the stereo? It sounds better. You did the thing, don't adulterate it.
So I have heard people say that when you're mixing an Atmos, you have same thing that you said. You don't want it to sound like a tin can when it's by itself in the back, which means that you can leave the sound a little bit more natural.
Yeah.
And I do understand that a lot of the stuff that you're working with probably it's generated out of the computer world too. But in instances where we can capture sounds with microphones, I wonder if it can, ultimately will open up more of a world of appreciation of mic placement and things like that too, where you're like, wow, we don't have to mess with this sound so much through mixing tricks. So let's just really carefully place the mic so that what comes out of that back speaker sounds really great as that guitar. But I know that, the flip side of that is what you talked about earlier, which is the question of creating an Atmos. And with some other guests, we've talked about this on the show, that because of latency and the processing and rendering, it's not like you can just plug a mic in and it just shows up in the back speakers.
Yeah. I mean, I think it just opens up to like, it makes you more, there's an intention, that happens that you have to be aware of, or that you get to be aware of, I've definitely started doing records like the beginning. It was all like, okay, we did this record, we started it 2 years ago. Didn't even know we were doing Atmos, and now the label wants Atmos, or I heard this thing in Atmos and I'm interested in it or whatever. And so we're taking this thing that wasn't really intended to be in this situation and putting it in this situation. And a lot of that has been really cool and we've gotten cool results. But I think the cooler thing is now starting projects and being like, okay, like the first record I ever did in Atmos, I was very lucky. I was recording it and doing most of the post-production on it. So the stereo mixing and the Atmos mixing, excuse me. And it was a classical record. It was like an experimental classical record. So we are working with this grand piano, which we actually tracked at Shirk Studios. It's full circle.
Okay, great. Let's go right there. So is there such a thing as recording it for Atmos?
I mean,
and if
I think there's a thing,
of course you get to make up the answer since it's so brand new.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we tried, every time I put up a microphone, I thought, okay, so where is the listener listening to this source, and how can I make sure that I have all the information I need so that when I'm sitting under 714 speakers, I can, use that information to create this space, recreate this space in the middle of, Shirk Studios live room or whatever. So it was like a couple string quartets, piano, and then a couple other like digital, sampled instrument things. But yeah, I mean, lots of room mics, lots of different like mics placed with different perspectives, that we got to play with.
Yeah. Well, so thinking about ways that I would probably try something like that, recording in Pro Tools, for example, you can record in mono and stereo. We're used to that, but you can also record a track can be a multi a surround track, right? So you can have one track of a piano have, 7, I don't know what the limitations are and stuff, but you can have a whole bunch of channels or beds that are recorded onto that one track. And I suppose you could just name them so that you knew that this was the piano, rear left, piano rear right, or something like that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And, but you also, you're thinking about it like, when you're placing things, you're kind of thinking about it in reverse. I describe it as, because you're not thinking about it from where like the speaker position is, but from where you are hearing the response from the room or whatever, So it can get kind of complicated. And obviously, the more microphones you have, the more you open yourself up to some weird things as you start to fold things down into each other. But yeah,
but
no,
you can
I think
always
that's
just
a great
ditch
idea.
that mic, not use it.
Of course, that's my favorite thing to do.
But I will say the analogy for me is the drum recording experience, and I think any of us can understand that. The day that you kept thinking like, oh, let's put another mic up here and distort it. Oh, let's put another one here. Let's do that. What if we want to use this? And then next thing you find, you find yourself trying to sneak in a little bit of every drum mic that you put up, all 18 of them or something.
Yeah.
And then you're like, why do my drums sound like shit right now?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's very common practice especially when I get something I didn't record and I have, 16, 25, whatever microphones for a drum kit. I'm like, okay, what is this? Is this useful? No. Okay. What is this? No. I mean, I did the Audiotree sessions we did. They were all live, recorded live, mixed live. And then we ran ozone on our output to master live, quote unquote. And when the band stopped playing, we cut those tracks into, 6 to 8 songs and uploaded it to our DSPs. And that was it, So by the time the band had put their guitar in the case, it was out the door.
So tell us what were the Audiotree sessions?
Yeah, so they still do them. They're live broadcasts from their studio in Wicker Park. And yeah, I mean, that's where I really cut my teeth on music. And I think it's also why, I got this theory at Electrical, which was like, listen to the musician, understand what they're doing, make what they're putting into the world, come out of the speakers, that kind of thing. And then at Audiotree, it was tested every single day, multiple times a day, because we'd have a French metal band come in and then a folk bluegrass band come in and then an R&B something or other come in. And it was just like constantly different. So you could never like rely on, oh, this is where this goes. This is where this goes. You're always listening. You're always reacting. And then, yeah, you're mixing down on faders on the SSL and cutting everything. And then that's it. If it's not good, it's your fault,
So it was live to 2-track, or did you go to the multi-track and then mix down from the multi-track?
No. So the band's playing in the control room. It was filmed too. So if you go on YouTube, you can search Audiotree Live or whatever, and you'll see all the sessions. When I was there, I did over 700 live sessions over 6 years. And I started on the audio side, I started the Far Out series, which is what we called our sessions that we did in weird places. So empty swimming pool, abandoned building, tennis court, whatever. Some of it was like fun and tongue in cheek with whatever band we were working with, but let's play a metal band and, a gas station or whatever. Yeah. So, but yeah, you just got really good at like reacting and understand what was happening. And so, yeah.
Well,
but yeah,
so
we
that
did
reminds
record
me-
multi-tracks as a safety, but we were mixing off of the SSL completely. So no returning or anything like that.
That's great. Yeah, that's my experience was the Bonnaroo Hay Bale studio, and it was live performances. And for the majority of it, it was mixed through an analog console down to 2-track. And then somewhere we'd mult it off to capture multi-tracks as an archive.
Yeah,
but what I
that's
discovered
exactly
from
right.
that was there was this amazing quality of sound when something never gets converted, when it's a microphone through wires, through an analog desk, all the way down to the end of the mix. There's like a coherency to the sound and a detail to the high end. It's like, that just is unlike anything else. If you hit multi-track and then come back to the desk and mix it after the fact, even if you mix it right away, it just doesn't have that same thing. Totally.
Yeah, and I mean, there's also something to be said. Like so we have it's a loft studio, quote unquote, here, right? So I get people all the time asking, like, is it like annoying to be in the same room as like so and so playing whatever? And at some point it maybe was starting, but now it's like so hard for me to work in rooms where the drummer's 100 feet, 800 feet away from me or whatever. It's like there's a reactiveness that happens when you're doing it in real time with a musician, and we got that out of Audiotree too. It was one pane of glass between me and the artist, but I see that guitarist like just itching to hit that pedal and do a blistering guitar solo. I'm ready to kick it up.
Right. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's the same thing. If you ever play with some other musicians, it's a totally different experience if you're isolated and you're trying to respond to the musician through headphones versus if you're in the same space. And boy, if you just take the headphones off, it's a whole different experience. If you just use your ears and you're
right.
Two acoustic guitar players sitting in front of each other, facing each other, are going to play very differently than people in faraway rooms with headphones cranked up.
1,000%. And there's pros and cons to everything. And I guess that's our job, to be aware of that and figure out what the right solution is.
Yeah, we're the keepers of pros and cons. Okay, cool. So let's flip back to Atmos again and talk about this things that were created and how they ended up in the Atmos mix. So Sen Morimoto, If the Answer Isn't Love, great track. I think it's one of the first ones in your playlist. Mm-hmm. It's got this big ass guitar solo that happens, and it's just like, my head was inside the guitar solo when it happened. So it's like this great ability for it to be giant, but it doesn't just sound like it was turned up way too loud. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is, to me, that's a cool new level of literal volume in an Atmos experience that doesn't just mean way louder.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much choreography happening, when creating, I'm always like looking at like analogies, it's like cooking is a great analogy. Like choreography, like stage production is a great analogy. I did a record, like a couple months ago with, an artist who is like a classically trained, ballerina and like ice skate person, and that we were doing ice skate person. I'm sure there's a correct way of describing that, but we were doing their record in Atmos, and they were constantly like thinking about it as like choreography. And I think with Sen's stuff too, there's a lot of choreography going on. We're constantly playing with the soundstage and constantly moving things in the foreground and the background. And yeah, that guitar, it might not feel like it's like, oh, it's coming from the front left to the back right or whatever, but there's like those little movements that like adjust your brain and take your focus and then hide the magic trick of the next thing coming in, or whatever.
And that would be a version of a record that is kind of a part at a time. It's assembled through overdubs, right? It's not necessarily all of it. Some of it might be a live performance of multiple musicians in the studio, but a lot of it is one thing at a time.
Yeah, so that record, I mean, Sen is also like my best friend. I produced this record with him. Every record he's put out, we've worked a little bit more intimately together, which has been kind of fun. Cannonball, his first studio record, I mastered, and I did some recording on it. And then he did everything himself. His self-titled second record, I mixed all of it and mastered it. And then this third record, I produced, recorded, and did the stereo mix, the Atmos mix, and then the Atmos master. And we had Bob Weston master the stereo for us.
Cool.
And he
Right on.
kicked it out of the park. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, Sen came to me with demos that he made in his house, and he's always playing with like this, like, you know, real instrument, fake instrument, you know, hyper sampled, you know, real feel kind of thing. So, I mean, the song Deeper on that track, or on that record, is a really fun example, because it's constantly moving between sampled drums and real drums.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting how like we kind of developed that as you're like falling deeper into the song, quote unquote, you're moving through like scenes, you know. Which I think
there was
is,
another
it
track
works.
on their Bad State, which has got some real funky drums on it.
Yeah, and Ryan Person is the drummer on this record, and he's a badass. So, yeah, he's a monster. But yeah, we had Ryan in the studio for a couple days, where a lot of it was like Sen being like, okay, this is my idea. How do we make this more appropriate or better or whatever? And then we're working out things and cutting things, and yeah, sampling the live drums. But yeah, I think
when you're doing drums, or when you're doing anything between the stereo and the Atmos, and you've got like funky drums. So I think of, if I'm remembering those correctly, I'm thinking of, you know, distressors and that kind of sound, like really hyper compressed stuff that's very controlled drum sounding, controlled drum sounds. And then when you think about like treatments in stereo mix versus Atmos mix, do you find that it's a thing where you think about reinventing the treatments, or is it more like, no, we might have a plug-in chain that's working for it, and we might still stick to the same plug-in chains, but we might just make different adjustments to those settings from one mix to the other?
Yeah, I think it's typically the latter, because I mean, my hope is that every Atmos mix that I do is not a completely different song, you know, obviously. So I'm trying to find as much as I can use from the stereo, because I mean, we also sweated it out for months, you know, trying to make this right, you know, and to sweep that under the rug, and then, you know, it's just not fun and not practical. So
but the Atmos mixes sound so great. I mean, they sound, when I listen to them, they sound like, wow, this is the way this should go.
Yeah,
I mean, it's funny. It's funny that you arrive at that. And then like, it's like, it almost informs that everything else, stereo and all the other things, we're just ultimately trying to get here. And here's the Atmos, and here we are.
I mean, I think that's my hope when I'm doing it in that way, because, you know, all of a sudden you have all this freedom, you know, I mean, I've heard people also describe it in the sense of like, you know, it's either you're like watching the music or you're like in the music, you know, you're looking through the window or you're in the house, you know, and that is my hope. That's like a sign of a good mix for me. If that happens, you know, and yeah, I mean, always experimenting, always learning and stuff. This record in particular, I mean, when we were doing it, it wasn't ever really intended to be an Atmos. It wasn't not intended to. But halfway through it, you know, I'm on the phone with like the label head. And I'm like, guys, we have to do this. I can do it. We have to do it. It will work, and it will be something that will add value, you know? So,
so what you're saying with your previous analogy is we want to be in the house.
We want to be in the house.
Brok in the house.
Yeah. I mean, that record's not a passive record, you know, in terms of lyrics, in terms of sounds, in terms of everything. And so, to be able to have the ability to create these soundscapes that are constantly changing, are not passive, are not stable, it like, I think helps for the art in general. Yeah.
Empirical Labs, creators of the iconic Distressor, offer high-performance gear for audio professionals. The Fatso, or full analog tape simulator and optimizer, brings the warmth of vintage tape and tube electronics to your digital recordings. Perfect for mixes, masters, or overdubs by adding harmonic generation, high-frequency saturation, tape emulation, and compression. The impressive new Pump, a 500 series classic knee compressor, shares its DNA with the analog Distressor and Arouser plugin. It features 8 selectable compression ratios, precise attack and release controls, saturation, a high-pass filter, and a first-time ever attack mod for added transient control, which is ideal for adding more snap to your snare drum. All Empirical Labs products are hand-assembled and tested right down to the circuit boards in northern New Jersey, USA for durability and performance, designed to last and be easily updated. Go to empiricallabs.com to find the Arouser and Big Freak plugins, where you can use the coupon code RSR10 for 10% off. Remember to follow @Empirical Labs on Instagram, making studio gear that works a little easier, a little better, and a lot longer. Elevate your music production with the updated Complete 15 bundle from Native Instruments, featuring the new Contact 8. This comprehensive collection includes a fantastic range of versatile synths, sampled instruments, and innovative studio effects, giving you everything you need to bring your creative vision to life. Whether you're composing emotional scores, crafting deep dance floor grooves, or experimenting with unique sound design, Complete 15 has got you covered. Discover powerful plugins and instruments that guide you from the initial idea to the final mix. The included Contact 8 introduces exciting new tools like chords and phrases for instant inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a cutting-edge hybrid instrument that merges organic and synth sounds in real time. Plus, enjoy revamped versions of Massive X and Guitar Rig 7 Pro to take your sound even further. Then, polish off your mixes with the AI-enhanced Isotope Ozone 11, included in the Complete 15 bundle. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. All right, so not to pick on Sen Morimoto, but another question about that record. So Diagnosis, the intro has a, I think I had a typo. I put has a comprehensive stereo vocal effect. I think it's just, I don't know what that word was, but I think it was really cool. A stereo vocal effect, very wide. So my question about that is like, you know, this ability to create sort of like wider than stereo sounds when you're mixing an Atmos. What's some stuff that you find really helpful and useful to do that?
Yeah. I guess I go back to specifically in Atmos. We're talking about Atmos, correct?
Yeah.
With this song. Yeah. So, I mean, there's, it's like, you're trying to do the magic trick, you know, where it's like if something, okay, you want something to be really wide, you want something to be really open, which means we need to have some sort of focal point distracting you enough to where you know where center is, you know where grounded is, and this other thing is happening outside of that, you know? So
interesting. So it's the juxtaposition, it's the contrast that really makes things exist.
I think so, you know, I think that's exactly what it is. So and really sells the, you know, whatever you're trying to do.
And do you find it's the same widener tricks that you would use in stereo work for Atmos too? They're just going to different locations in the mix?
I think that from my experience, a lot of the typical widener things, I mean, there are some things that I like to do. Like, okay, so a lot of times I'll have a slap back that's going to the back speakers only, you know? Mm-hmm. So if I have a vocal, I'm hearing it in front of me and I'm hearing the reaction of the room behind me, you know? And that's like a great way to get some length off of it.
Right. Like imagine that, Rockstars. That's actually what happens in a room sometimes.
100%. Yeah. That's all I'm doing is I'm emulating reality, you know? And so that's like an easy way to do some of those things, Widener things. But like in terms of like, like stereoizer, spatial, that kind of stuff, I think a lot of that relies on it being stereo, and there are usually better ways just by, I feel like I can find a lot more success in just splitting the signal and pushing it wide, in Atmos, rather than using like a stereoizer.
What's always funny to me to remember is like when I think about stereo and I think about like a widening effect, my brain's thinking about this effect doing something, but I have to remember that it all boils down to like, there's only two speakers in stereo, it's like there's a left speaker and there's a right speaker. And the effect that I'm doing and the choices we're making in a mix, all they're doing is making the left speaker do one thing and the right speaker do something slightly different. And it fools our brain into having an experience. And so if you're now mixing an Atmos, I'm sure it makes sense to think, okay, like let's say we've got a side left and a side right, but there's still a front left and a front right, and there's still a center, and there's still the ceiling one. So it's like, now every one of those speakers could be doing a slightly different thing, and it could give a perception.
And they are, because if you think about like something, it's like over my left shoulder, but it's, half the distance from the speaker towards me.
That's called the client. And they're staring at you while you finish the mix.
Exactly. Yeah. But like, you're placing things in a 3-dimensional space, not just like, more in the left speaker than the right speaker, or more in the back left speaker than the front right speaker. You're putting things in a 3-dimensional space. So there's information happening all around you, and all the speakers are like active.
Even if it's just a pan,
you're saying. Even if it's just a pan. Yeah. And that's part of the magic trick or the science or whatever you want to call it. But
all right, let's talk about recording guitars with Atmos in mind. How would you record an indie rock band with guitars differently to make for a great Atmos mix? What's some stuff? And maybe you don't have to answer this in the context of what you've done before, but maybe you're thinking about it in like next time you record a indie rock band. And they're like, we want this mix to be in. So we've got the classic like drums, 2 guitars, bass, vocals, keys. What are some things you might try in terms of the recording process to give yourself the stuff that would be fun in the Atmos mix?
Yeah. I guess it depends on obviously this is, everything depends on the intention, right? But if you want those choruses to be like wall of guitar, big thing, then I would probably take as much doubling as I can of aspects of it, so I can literally stack the guitars around the room,
Oh, cool! So you could have your left, right guitars could be one take, and then the double take is now the side left and the side right or something.
100%. Yeah, totally. And, playing with tone and things like that. And I think with Atmos, it's a cheat. It's a shortcut in a lot of ways because, before you're trying to layer these guitars and making sure like, I haven't pushed the low end too much to where now I've like just squashed everything, or, it's now building this like 2K resonance that's like really annoying to listen to,
Right.
So you have the ability to, just do so much more with it, I think. Yeah.
Well, and it makes me think that, do you ever feel like, so to record in one studio and then come back and translate that into Atmos and have a take on it when you're mixing is one experience, but to say, oh man, I'm just not patient enough for that, and want to plug a guitar in and record it right away in your studio and then double it and immediately pan it into the Atmos and like flip back and forth and check those things. I feel like that would be really tempting to want to like, because like there's so much to discover in that world of creating all these sounds. I would think you'd be wanting to put yourself in a playroom of trial and error, like just, I'm going to try everything I can think of and discover what all these Atmos sounds can be, as quickly as possible.
Yeah, totally. The answer to that is yes. That sounds amazing. That is fun. More experimenting is more knowledge, and makes the next record easier, you know, or gives you more information. But yeah, I mean, again, it's like I'm just constantly thinking about intention too, you know, because sometimes big guitar is not the right thing, you know.
Right.
Sometimes big vocal is the thing, or big kick drum, or whatever, you know. So,
well, I mean, I think about stuff that I experimented with when I learned about it in stereo. Like I remember, you know, I was in school and they're like, "Here's how you do an XY pair and a near, you know, space pair and everything." And I, you know, went up to St. Louis for the weekend, hanging out with my buddy, and I'm like, "Dude, we got to try all these things." And so we break out our 257s, you know, and start placing them everywhere in the basement and recording it to hear what it sounds like coming out of speakers, you know, and we're recording like just like a, you know, banging on a steel shelf down in the basement, like, "Listen, it sounds stereo. How cool." You know, and I would want to, I think it'd be fun to like start discovering all these things for Atmos stuff. It's like I can picture a band in a space where maybe your attitude is, you know, let's put the band on a sound stage, and now all the room mics that are around the space go to the different speakers and they create a sense of a band on a stage in this room. And another one's like, okay, there's a mic on the guitar amp, there's one across the room, and we throw the guitar amp in the back left, but we throw room mic in the front right.
100%. Yeah.
And stuff like that, you know, wanting to hear all these weird things. But then you think about like layering all those guitars and you're like, well, now we got the same version of a room mic in every speaker. Now, like my brain's confused. I don't know what kind of room that is.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And that's the trial and error part of it, I guess. But yeah,
you know, or like, have you ever done ones where you set up a stereo mic and you're like, okay, we're going to do every overdub and standing in a different location, so that when this all adds up, it sounds like a real one. So I could see like, you know, you got a whole bunch of Atmos mics in different positions, and you got to keep moving the guitar amp to different parts of the room for each overdub.
Yeah, I mean that's common for like I'll do like, you know, there's a group vocal section or whatever, and I just want it to be overwhelming vocal, you know, or whatever. It's like, yeah, everybody hop around my Bloomline pair or whatever and move to the right every take, you know, or something, you know. It's a common thing that'll be played with.
Now, do you think that we could record stuff and listen to the surround in real time as we're recording, and then we're only saving objects, you know, converting something to an object later for the Atmos? Do you think you could use the surround? Is that even the right question to ask?
You mean like right this moment?
Yeah, like during the whole creation process, could you be maybe monitoring and surround so that things are treating things like beds, instead of having to create everything in stereo and then wait for the Atmos to like break it out and see how it works?
Yeah, you totally could. Definitely could. Yeah, it'd be a little complicated on the just like routing side, but it would totally be possible. Yeah.
It would. Well, it's nothing like adding a little complication and making a record easier, huh?
100%. But yeah, I mean, I think that is really interesting. I haven't done that, but maybe I should.
Well, you are recording in you've got this loft style space, so in a way, your recording process is already divorced from the speakers as part of the. I mean, divorce is a harsh word, but you know, it's separated from the speakers.
Yeah, totally.
During the creation stage, because that's the nature of recording in one big room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But if you're in a studio that might have a mixing room and a bunch of, do you think electrical's ever going to put Atmos in? Probably not.
I've had conversations, and they're not interested, but maybe they'll change. I don't know. You know, everybody changes, you know, a little bit, but I think, I think that they are happy doing what they're doing. So, and people are happy that they are. So,
yeah. No, I meant that as kind of a joke anyway, but,
yeah, I don't know. How many tape machines do you need for?
How many tape machines? And they got the coolest ones too, with the dancing LED meters.
Yeah.
And those are, what are the tape machines? What brand are they again?
They've got a couple, but they have Studers mostly.
Oh, right. Those are Studers. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So let's see. Let's just keep asking about some of these records you did. So, NNAMDÜ Dibs. It's a great balance of like chaotic drums and fuzz guitars, ambient synths and chimes and vocoders.
Yeah.
Talk some about that project.
Yeah, NNAMDÜ is a madman. NNAMDÜ, that record actually is the first. So we started the studio technically in Florida. And then because during the pandemic, I had moved back to Florida to take care of some family things. And then we started the studio there and then moved it back up to Chicago. And NNAMDÜ had reached out to me and been like, hey, I need you to mix this record. Can you mix this record? I also need it done like right this moment. And I'm like, okay, well, technically I will have been into this space for 4 days, but if you're willing to like, sit on fold up chairs and help me patch a couple things together, we could totally mix your record. And, so he helped me do that. And that was the first record I did in the space we're in today.
That's awesome.
He's a madman, an evil genius, a very sweet person as well.
Cool vocal effects and everything too,
Yeah, we had a lot of fun. And he's also producing while we're going back and forth. And that record specifically, I mean, there were some songs that were not finished when we started mixing the record. So, I'd work all day and then he'd stay, a couple more hours at night working at the studio by himself, figuring a couple things out. And I'd come in the morning and he'd be like, I got some more guitars for you or whatever. And we would do it.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was definitely like we're building it as it was going. I have some vocals on that record actually, which is rare and funny. So
Are you sick of searching for the right cable only to realize it doesn't even exist? Or maybe you're asking yourself, how in the world do I hook my studio up? Well, say goodbye to those headaches because Trace Audio can get you wired up right. Based in Nashville, but serving studios nationwide and around the world, Trace Audio specializes in custom cables, labels, and wiring solutions. From labeling your patch bay to wiring your full studio or large format console, Trace Audio does it all, whether you're a home or pro studio owner. And the real game changer is Trace Audio's custom patch bay label designer. It's a one-stop tool to color code, organize, and design labels for your 1/4-inch or XLR patch bays. No more wondering where things are on your patch bay, when instead you can have sleek, professional labels that are easy to read and easy to use. Try the free online patch bay label designer at traceaudio.com and use the code RSR15 to get 15% off your custom labels and take your studio to the next level.
Did you know that one of the most common fears with audio mastering is not knowing if your mix is ready or not? Look, nobody wants to send a mix in for mastering only to realize there's some resonating low end that's going on that wasn't picked up in the mix. That's where I come in. Hi, I'm Brian Murphy of Sound Porter Mastering. As soon as you send a mix for me to listen to, I'm already on your team. Mix feedback and master readiness is a service I offer for free and for good reason. That's because a great mix produces an even greater master. So if I can help you minimize oddities and issues and even provide some advice that will help your mix translate better, then mastering becomes more efficient and effective. And you don't stress about those issues at all. Just go to soundporter.com. There you can find videos, a FAQ, and a pre-mastering checklist on my website that will explain a lot of what you need to know. When you're ready for great feedback, just reach out via my low-friction contact form and send me a mix to hear. Again, you can find me at soundporter.com.
And then one of the other tracks I noted was Smartass, which is a good,
great song.
Title for a track anyway. Cool guitar and vocal pitch effects and stuff like that. What are some of the things that, if you remember any of that stuff, if you don't recall the details on stuff, that's fine. You can just talk about it in generalities.
Totally. Well, we did play a lot with like, he was really into the whole like Midwest punk scene kind of vibe, like record everything to a tape cassette. And then, the cassette's not really the most professional thing and it's constantly Verispeeding kind of vibe. So a lot of the things we would do is we would cut it all and then just like take sections and shift Verispeed the whole master around and stuff like that.
Just export a sound to cassette and back in again to treat
100%. Yep. 100%.
That's interesting. I love those ideas. And when I think about them, I find myself asking like, well, I'd probably just use Sketch Cassette plugin or something for that. Have you tried both? Have you tried treating things in plugin world and then treating things where you actually export it out? And do you have any feelings about, what, not necessarily better or worse, but like when you actually export it and treat it and bring it back in, the experience is like this versus like if you use plugins to treat it, the experience is like this?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I'm a little calculated with this aspect a lot of times. Like if I'm working with an artist and they're not quite sure what they want, it's like, well, it's way easier to keep it in the digital domain so we can always change our mind or come back tomorrow and
speed,
delete it, Yeah, exactly. Instead of me being like, well, technically I bounced it to this thing and I go, no, nobody wants to hear that, So,
we do. This is exactly the right place.
Exactly. Yeah. But with like NNAMDÜ, it's like he was very clear-minded of like what he wanted. And I'm realizing like, I'm always looking for ways to like simplify things. I feel like that's a lot of my job is like, how do I make it evident? How do I make it simple? How do I make it clear, And so a great way to do that is just print it and move on, commit to what you're doing. So I'm constantly trying to commit. The Sen record, we did all of the drums on that record that are real drums. We recorded with 4 microphones. We used Nashville folk or Stagger.
Yeah, Stagger microphone Stagger.
Yeah, we used his SR2Ns for overheads, a 441 on the snare, and then a FET 47 on the front side of the kick drum. And that was the drum sound. And we kind of committed to it in a way of like, we're going to do something like a little different and strange. And that's going to like influence the rest of the record, but we're committing to it, slam it through my Calrec pre's, Kentucky Fry It. And that's the character of this album.
I've got some of the PQ 1161s in a rack.
Yeah.
And they really crunch nicely when you turn them up a little bit.
100%. Yeah. So all the NNAMDÜ record too, it's like we're constantly like, okay, how do we like commit this? And we were on a time crunch. I mean, I mixed that record in like 8 days. So
well, it's one of the nice things about having outboard gear too, is it gives you that ability to get a sound in the moment and then say, ooh, I like that sound, Yeah. Versus, like you talked about working with UAD. They make wonderful interfaces. I just got a new interface in that I'm very excited about. Grace Design, the M108.
Cool.
Which is a very, great high gain, very clean sounding mic pre, which would be very useful and give me that flexibility of doing things to treat it afterwards. But, it's funny how there are situations where you're like, I don't want the mic pre to add any color. And then other times where you're like, I absolutely want it to give me a sound that gets me excited and that's 100% the sound on the way in.
Yeah. I have a pair of the Chandler Limited TG2s that are like my favorite thing in the whole world. If I could have like 16 of them, that's all I would use because those are so versatile in that way. Like you can get it clean. You have impedance switches that will change some of the frequency responses, but then driving those things and like, oh my God, I'm amazing. Everything I do is amazing.
It's always a good feeling. It's funny, actually, I bet if I spin that right back to your Audiotree sessions, well, you guys had really different sessions, so maybe you won't feel this way. But when I was doing the Bonnaroo sessions, we kept essentially the same mic setup and a new band would come in. And from moment to moment, I would think, I really suck at this, or wow, I'm so good at this. And then you quickly realize you're like, oh, it's just the band. It's the artist that comes in and plays, Yeah. Like it's the same mic on even the same guitar.
Yeah. There were aspects of that too, about the Audiotree stuff. I mean, there's just practical things. Like the band loads in, we have 2 hours to sound check, and then we're live to YouTube. And while we're live to YouTube, we're cutting in real time. And then they leave and we upload it, So 2 hours is like kind of crazy. So there were things where it's like we always use the Telefunken M82 on the kick drum. We always use a 57 on top. We use 414s on the toms. We use 460Bs on the overheads, you know. Guitars, we can use Royer R121s or 57s, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But I think that's also part of it, like, you know, finding and introducing limits and parameters so that you can kind of concentrate on what's important, you know? So when you push that fader up and you're like, oh, that's not what I expected, you can understand like why, you know, because there's a bunch of other variables that are not in the picture.
Yeah, totally. No, I agree 100% that, you know, great art is about defining your boundaries so that you can push up against those boundaries and try and break them.
I love that.
know?
Yeah. And I'm always looking for the boundary. I'm always, especially, I mean, the Sen record, I feel like every moment we were like, okay, how do we take this too far? And then, I don't know, maybe we'll leave it there or maybe we'll dial it back. But I mean, that record in particular, we actually did a whole pass of the record where we just fried the hell out of it. And the label was like, what is this? And we're like, okay, all right, we'll take it back one step. And then we landed where we are, you know, and I think it's amazing. You know, I'm very proud of it.
Yeah,
so.
It's funny. Even when I say that about the boundaries and I'm remembering, you know, what you said about the, you know, it'd be complicated to record in surround, but mix it in Atmos. And it's like, there's different kinds of boundaries. It's almost like you want to create boundaries around your process that you can push up against and break or almost break, but you don't want such a complicated process that all your boundaries are breaking without your control. It's like you want to be the ones to break it, or, you know, have the happy accidents, right?
100%, yeah.
So KAINA, anybody can be in love. Big verbs on strings and pads and stereo.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about some of your favorite reverbs and how you like mixing with reverb. And then how is that different in Atmos versus stereo?
Yeah, definitely different. I use the Avid Space plugin a lot. It has like all the like emulated IR reverb things that people have recorded. I pretty much rarely ever use one reverb on anything. My template is usually like, you know, some sort of room, plate, a spring, a hall, a slap delay, a chorus, and like an echo, quarter note echo or whatever. I don't use that on every session, of course, but a lot of times on a vocal, I'll use a little bit of the room to get some initial reaction, a little bit of the plate to get a little more tail, you know, maybe the hall to brighten it up a little bit. But yeah, rarely have I ever been like, oh, this reverb just sounds normal, you know?
Yeah.
But there are always aspects of things that I'm like, okay, I like the tail of this, but I don't like how muddy or heavy it feels, you know, and how the decay stays around for too long, you know, all kinds of stuff. But
so it's like you're giving yourself some of the fundamental tools. It's like having, again, like a cooking analogy. It's having the basic spices and ingredients around.
I got my oils and my salt and my pepper and, you know, whatever. So,
yeah. Now I'm leaning a little raw vegan again these days, so I'm not really sure what maybe those are just my selection of fruits and vegetables.
Good for you. Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
So we can't go away without talking about Madison and Bobby McFerrin. How cool is that? Tell us about that project. Yeah, tell us about that. So Rockstars, if you're not sure who I'm referring to, don't worry. Just be happy. Tell us who's Bobby McFerrin.
Yeah, well, if you don't know who Bobby McFerrin is, you're wrong.
That's a good start.
You definitely do. But yeah, I mean, Madison, incredible musician, such a sweet person.
Is Madison Bobby's daughter or something like that?
Yep.
Great.
Yep. Yeah, and there's a couple McFerrins, and all of them are artists, you know, in their own right.
Are they Chicago?
Madison has Chicago history, but they're out in the Bay Area, I believe, West Coast. But
cool.
But yeah, so Madison actually hit us up in a hurry because they had a like late night show slot during the pandemic. And they needed, during those late night shows during the pandemic, everybody was recording themselves and then sending them off. I think it was the Colbert Show. And she was like, "Oh my God, I got your contact and I need a place to record. It looks beautiful. It sounds good. Can we do this tomorrow?" And I'm like, sure. Yeah, totally. And so had her in with her band, did the recording, the mixing for like a couple live tracks for that. And while they were here, they were listening to some stuff in Atmos, and they're like, we're halfway through this record. Maybe we want to do an Atmos mix. This sounds amazing. Let's do that. So, fast forward 2 months, and I'm working on the Atmos mixes for her.
And so Bobby had recorded his vocals out on the West Coast or something.
Yeah. I don't know where he did. I imagine he probably just did them from his house or something,
Right.
But
what was it like to mix his voice?
Oh my God. It was just like unreal. Like, it sounds amazing, obviously.
Right. And it's familiar. Like you're familiar with the voice.
100%. And the part on the song that he's on is like, is so interesting and I don't know, guttural. It's a beautiful thing. And yeah, it just felt unreal. I'm like, I can't believe I'm working on this and get the opportunity to work on this. I'm so grateful to Madison and their team for everybody, So yeah, there's so many great songs on that record, and if you can see Madison live, you really should as well, because her band is incredible, and she's like a performer, capital P,
That's awesome. For 15 years, I owned a famous MCI console that came from Criteria Studio C in Miami, where it made many Grammy-winning records in the 1970s, and it sounded amazing. When I was ready to upgrade my studio to full digital mixing, I decided to team up with Rick Carson at Make Believe Studio, Metric Halo, and Golden Ear producer Bill Simzik to recreate the legendary MCI console as the new MBSI plugin. This isn't just another boring plugin. The MBSI captures that same iconic sound that was used on multi-million selling records like Hotel California for the Eagles, produced by Bill Simzik, Saturday Night Fever and Stayin' Alive for the Bee Gees, I Shot the Sheriff for Eric Clapton, We're an American Band for Grand Funk Railroad, and the soundtrack to Grease, and was loved by legendary producers like Tom Dowd, Todd Rundgren, and Bill Simzik, to name just a few. The MBSI plugin not only delivers the authentic sound of the original MCI console faithfully, but it also adds new features like a top-notch compressor, overdrive, and a high and low-pass filter switch. Features I always wished that the console had. Now you too can get that Grammy-winning MCI sound in your home studio, just like me. Whether you're recording or mixing, you can experience the sound of Miami 1976 with the MBSI plugin and soak up a little sunshine in your sound. Go to makebelievestudio.com/MBSI. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound weak or distant or lack punch or clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding a lot more like professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio using free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is that these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you're using. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can use the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. I'm thinking of Jacob Collier, and Native Instruments put out with Jacob Collier the audience choir plugin.
Oh yes, yeah,
and
I heard
he's
about this.
on stage conducting the audience to do oohs and ahs and different vowels and different pitches and everything like that. And then they've recorded it all, and that became a free download So Rockstars, if you're curious about that, you can just go get that over at Native Instruments, and you just install it into Contact, and now you're playing all these audience choirs on your keyboard. But it immediately reminded me of Bobby McFerrin doing that, because he famously had this YouTube video, and maybe it was TEDx talks even, where he's showing people how they instinctively find the pentatonic scale, I think it was, just singing notes, and he just raises his hand, not having shown them what the next note is, and everybody automatically goes up to the pentatonic note naturally. And it was very, very cool thing to see.
Yeah.
Have you seen
absolutely.
that? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Absolutely. It's amazing. It's I mean, we're all, there's a reason we resonate.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, I heard Bobby when he came out in the 80s with right. Don't Worry, Be Happy. And, and I'm jamming the cassettes on my jam box out at the pool in the summer. And then next thing you know, I'm like going around like punching my chest and going, trying it out. I didn't quite have the thing, but
yeah.
I worked.
Yeah.
On
I mean, it's just listening to his stems of his parts too. I mean, he was doing so much of that is like not really affected. It's like I'm allowing some of the things that are resonating to resonate, more at times and things like that. But it's a lot of just like letting him do what he does.
Yeah, and then you're also thinking like, Brok, don't sample it. No, Brok, just say no. Don't sample it. Okay, sample it. No, don't do it. Don't do it.
I did not, for the record.
I wonder if he's got his own sample pack out. That'd be fun to play some little Bobby sounds.
That would be fun. Yeah.
And Madison's voice is beautiful in that too.
Yeah, she's incredible.
Okay, great. So let's jump to our closing here. This is a question I love to ask all of our guests on the show. We get to take the Wayback Studio machine. It's a hypothetical question. You get to go back in time and find young Brok, who maybe was broke at that point. I don't know. Maybe
been broke a lot. Yeah.
And you say, listen, dude, I've come back to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day, whether you're mixing an Atmos or stereo or mono or whatever. What advice would you like to go back and give yourself if you could?
Yeah. Give me 1 minute to think about that.
Okay. Full minute. Starting the clock now. Rockstars, while you're at it, remember to go over to nativeinstruments.com and pick up the free Jacob Collier Audience Choir plugin for your studio creative needs. I wonder if they recorded that stuff Atmos ready. Brok's never going to think of this because I'm distracting him.
Yeah, maybe it's better. Maybe I shouldn't be thinking about it too much. I think it's just like, I think being present and listening, like those are the most important things. And they'll like see you through 99% of, life in general, like it's funny how the recording process, the creating process, the production process, it's not a thing I do with my life. It's an extension of my life, And so, really embracing the reality of like, hey, if you can listen, if you can understand, if you can show up and be present in that moment, like you can figure everything out, everything's going to be okay. Don't worry, be happy.
Don't worry, be happy. Yeah.
No, but
maybe just to continue on that, what are the things that knock you out of being present? What are the pitfalls of not being present?
Great question. There's one that I'm grateful. I feel like I can avoid pretty easily just because I don't know why, but if I feel myself going there, it's like the worst thing you can do is the whole like comparison thing,
Right.
Even in an innocent way, when I get like a mix to do and they're like, hey, I really like this, yada, yada, yada. And every single time when I chase that, whatever they gave me, And I think like, man, Brok, you nailed it. You did exactly that thing. It comes back and they're like, I don't love it. And then I listen back to it. I'm like, yeah, no, it sucks. I should just turn that off and just do the thing, do what you do, And so, I think that's one thing that can knock you loose a little bit. There's just, I'm still growing up. I'm 30 years old, I feel like I'm in a lot better place than I was 10 years ago. But just the whole idea of like, all the stresses that life gives you, money, does this make sense? Is this, worth doing? All those things, like the things that I personally, have to work really hard to not ruminate on some of those negative things. And every time, working on the Sen record specifically, that's another really good one to come back to, of just like, I found there were so many times where like kind of still new at the studio, or trying to make things work, trying to figure things out. And if I worried about that, I'd gotten this weird headspace. But every time I just come back and like listen to the music, work on the music, focus on the music, be present, it was like I was healed, immediately. I'm like, oh yeah, I understand why this makes sense, and I understand why this is worth doing, and we'll figure it out. So that's been very good for me, I think.
That's awesome, man. I like that. Just work on the music. Just listen to the music, work on the music.
Yeah.
It's a good takeaway. Well, Brok, thanks so much for hanging with us on the podcast, man. It's been super fun hanging out with you and chatting, and I loved all the stuff we talked about. And then it's great to go listen to your music, and these mixes are really fabulous mixes. Your Atmos mixes, they sound a lot more advanced than 30 years old. You know what I mean? They just sound like
Well,
you sound like you bring in a lot of experience and care to them. So I encourage you to go listen, Rockstars. Again, the playlist is in the show notes. Pop your headphones on. It's probably your best way to listen to Atmos, unless you're sure that you got the right sound bar or you have an Atmos room.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
I think it's how everybody's going to listen.
Oh yeah, totally,
You know what I mean?
totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Let the Rockstars know, where can they find out more about you? Where can they go? What if they're ready to do their next great Atmos mix, or they just want to come record in a cool place where they're considered a friend?
Yeah, absolutely. So Instagram's the easiest place to find us on social media. The studio's Instagram is Friends of Friends Recording. My personal Instagram is Brok, B-R-O-K, the Casbah. So you can find me there as well. Our website is www.friendsoffriendsrecording.com. Feel free to reach out. We have a lot of resources on our Instagram as well. Actually, I post reels all the time about Atmos or recording, things like that. And I do live streaming for Patreon listeners, actually, where they can sit in on a mix session in real time twice a month.
That's awesome, man. Well, Brok, it's great to meet you. Thank you so much for hanging with us, Rockstars, and listening through yet another fun-filled episode of Recording Studio Rockstars. And Brok, I look forward to meeting you in person.
Thanks so much, Lidge.
All right, man. Go make some Atmos. Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lidge Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this show possible. iZotope, Native Instruments, Atom Audio, Empirical Labs, Sound Porter Mastering, and Trace Audio. And remember to take advantage of our special coupon codes. At iZotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 10 for 10% off any plugin purchase. At empiricallabs.com, use the code RSR10 for 10% off the Arouser and Big Freak plugins. And finally, use the code RSR15 to get 15% off your custom patch bay labels at traceaudio.com. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio, and they're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars. We'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.